Hello everyone.
About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did.
I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Story 1. I sat on my couch one evening, wrapped in a blanket and immersed in a book, when I felt a peculiar sensation. It was as if someone was watching me. I glanced up at the window and dismissed the thought, blaming it on my overactive imagination. The faint hum of the heater and the occasional creak of the house were the only sounds accompanying my solitude. I shook my head and returned to my book, determined not to let paranoia ruin my evening. The night deepened, and the neighborhood grew quieter, the streetlights casting soft glows across the empty roads. My living room was warm and cozy, a stark contrast to the cold darkness outside. I got up to make a cup of tea, my eyes unintentionally drifting to the window again. That was when I saw a silhouette standing still just beyond the glass. My heart raced as I froze in place, staring back at the unmoving figure. It was my neighbor, someone I had only exchanged polite greetings with in passing. He stood there, motionless, his face expressionless as he stared straight at me. For a moment I thought he might need help, but the way he stood, unnervingly still, sent chills down my spine. I waved awkwardly, hoping to break the eerie tension, but he did not respond. His lack of reaction made my pulse quicken. I stepped back from the window, my mind racing with questions. Was he trying to scare me? Was this some kind of misunderstanding? I decided to ignore it, reasoning that maybe he had been startled or was looking at something behind me. I closed the curtains, grateful for the barrier between us, and tried to shake off the unsettling encounter. However, the image of him standing there lingered in my mind, refusing to fade. An hour passed, and I tried to distract myself with a movie, but I could not focus. I kept glancing at the curtains, half expecting to see his shadow outlined against the fabric. The silence of the house began to feel oppressive, and every little noise seemed amplified. I reassured myself that I was overreacting, but my unease refused to subside. Eventually, I decided to call it a night, hoping sleep would bring some comfort. In bed, I left the hallway light on, something I had not done since childhood. As I lay there, I could not help but wonder if he was still outside. The thought made my skin crawl, but I forced myself to stay in bed, unwilling to give in to fear. The hours crept by, and eventually, exhaustion overtook me. I drifted into a restless sleep, filled with unsettling dreams of being watched. The next morning, the memory of the night before felt surreal, as though it had been a bad dream. I hesitated before pulling back the curtains, half expecting to see him still standing there. To my relief, the street was empty, and the daylight made everything feel safer. I convinced myself it had been a strange but harmless incident and decided to put it behind me. I went about my day as usual, determined not to let one odd encounter consume me. Days went by without any further incidents, and I began to feel foolish for having been so scared. Life returned to normal, and I barely thought about that night anymore. Then, one evening as I was locking up for the night, I glanced out the window and felt my stomach drop. He was there again, standing in the same spot, staring into my window with that same blank expression. This time it felt more deliberate, as if he was waiting for me to notice. My hands trembled as I pulled the curtain shut, my mind racing with a mix of fear and anger. What was he doing, and why? I considered confronting him, but quickly dismissed the idea. There was something deeply unsettling about his demeanor, and I did not want to put myself in danger. Instead, I decided to document the incident, taking a picture of him through a small gap in the curtains before retreating to my room. I spent the rest of the night on edge, jumping at every sound and peeking out the window to see if he was still there. He eventually left, but the experience left me shaken. The next day I decided to talk to another neighbor about it, hoping to get some advice or insight. I described what had happened, careful not to sound overly dramatic, but they seemed just as puzzled as I was. They suggested I keep an eye on the situation and consider contacting the authorities if it happened again. Over the next week, I was hyper-aware of my surroundings, constantly glancing out the windows and double-checking the locks. I started to feel trapped in my own home, the once comforting space now tainted by fear. I noticed small things that added to my paranoia, like unfamiliar footprints in the snow near my house and the feeling of being watched even during the day. I could not shake the sense that he was always nearby, lurking just out of sight. One evening, as I was sitting in the kitchen, I heard a soft knock on the back door. My heart leaped into my throat as I froze, unsure of what to do. The knock came again, more insistent this time. I grabbed my phone and called a friend, whispering about what was happening. They urged me to call 911, but I hesitated, not wanting to overreact if it was something innocent. Summoning my courage, I approached the door and peeked through the peephole. No one was there. My pulse pounded in my ears as I stepped back, my mind racing with possibilities. I checked all the locks and turned on every light in the house, hoping to deter whoever it was from coming back. Sleep was impossible that night, and I found myself pacing the house, clutching the kitchen knife for some semblance of security. By morning, I was exhausted and frazzled, but I knew I could not go on like this. I decided to report everything to the authorities, showing them the photo I had taken and explaining the series of events. They took my concerns seriously and assured me they would look into it. Knowing they were aware of the situation provided some relief, but I still felt uneasy. I installed security cameras around my property, hoping to catch any future disturbances on tape. The added layer of protection made me feel a little safer, though I still avoided looking out the windows at night. For a while there was no sign of him, and I began to hope that the situation had resolved itself. Then, one night I was reviewing the footage from the cameras and saw him standing at the edge of my yard, staring at my house. He did not approach, but the sight of him sent shivers down my spine. I handed the footage over to the authorities, who assured me they would increase patrols in the area. Their involvement gave me some peace of mind, but I knew I needed to take further steps to protect myself. I reached out to friends and family, letting them know what was going on and asking for their support. A friend offered to stay with me for a few nights, which helped ease my anxiety. Together, we developed a plan to handle any future encounters, including calling the authorities immediately if he showed up again. Having someone by my side made all the difference, and I began to feel a sense of control returning to my life. Eventually, the authorities informed me that they had spoken to him and issued a warning. They could not disclose the details, but they assured me that the situation was being monitored. I did not see him again after that, and slowly my life began to return to normal. The fear that had consumed me started to fade, replaced by a newfound sense of resilience. I had faced my worst fears and taken steps to protect myself, and that knowledge gave me strength. Though the experience was harrowing, it taught me the importance of trusting my instincts and seeking help when needed. My home became a safe haven once more, and I no longer felt like a prisoner of my own fear. The cameras remained as a precaution, but I no longer lived in constant dread. Life moved on, and so did I, determined to reclaim the peace and security that had been momentarily stolen from me. Story 2. When I left the office for lunch, I made sure to lock the door behind me. It was a habit, something I did without even thinking about it. I always double-checked, giving the knob a firm tug to ensure it was secure. My work involved sensitive information, and the last thing I wanted was for anything to go missing. The key was safely in my pocket, and I headed out, confident that everything was as it should be. Lunch was uneventful, just a quiet hour at my favorite spot a few blocks away. I took my time, enjoying the brief escape from my desk. As the clock neared 1 in the afternoon, I decided to head back. The walk was calming, the gentle breeze helping me reset before diving into the rest of the day's tasks. By the time I reached the building, I felt ready to tackle whatever waited for me. I took out my key as I approached the door, ready to unlock it. To my shock, the door was already open. It was not slightly ajar or partially cracked, it was wide open. My stomach sank as I stared at the doorway, the empty space where the locked barrier should have been. I could not immediately process what I was seeing. I distinctly remembered locking the door before I left. There was no reason for it to be open now. I stepped cautiously inside, my heart racing as I looked around. Nothing seemed out of place at first glance. The desk was still covered with neatly arranged papers, and my computer screen was off, just as I had left it. Even the pen holder, which I always kept in the same spot, was undisturbed. Still, an uneasy feeling settled over me. I could not shake the sense that someone had been there. I checked the lock on the door, examining it closely. There were no signs of tampering. The mechanism worked perfectly when I tested it with my key. This only deepened the mystery. If the lock was intact and I had the only key, how had the door been opened? I began to feel paranoid, imagining scenarios that seemed too far-fetched to be real. Yet the evidence was right in front of me. I walked further into the office, scanning every corner for clues. I opened drawers, checked behind the curtains, and even peered under the desk. Everything appeared untouched, but the nagging feeling persisted. I started to wonder if I had somehow forgotten to lock the door, though the thought seemed impossible. I had always been meticulous about security, especially in a place like this. Sitting at my desk, I tried to calm myself. Maybe there was a logical explanation, something I had overlooked. I considered calling someone to ask if they had entered the office while I was out, but no one else had a key. The idea of calling security crossed my mind, but I hesitated. Without any signs of a break-in, I worried I might come across as overreacting. Still, the situation was too strange to ignore. I decided to review the security footage from the building's cameras. The system was accessible from my computer, and I quickly pulled up the feed from earlier that day. I watched as I locked the door and left for lunch, confirming what I already knew. The hallway remained empty for the next hour, with no sign of anyone approaching my office. When I returned, the door was open, just as I had found it. The footage offered no explanation, only more questions. The unease grew stronger as I replayed the video, searching for anything I might have missed. Each time, the same sequence played out with no interruptions or anomalies. It was as if the door had opened on its own, though I knew that was impossible. Frustration began to set in, along with a creeping sense of dread. I could not shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I spent the next hour combing through the office again, determined to find an answer. This time I paid closer attention to small details, looking for anything out of place. In the corner of the room, near the bookshelf, I noticed a faint scuff mark on the floor. It was subtle, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. My heart raced as I examined it, wondering if it was a clue. Had someone been in the office after all? The mark led me to check the bookshelf more thoroughly. I ran my fingers along the edges, feeling for any sign of disturbance. One of the books seemed slightly misaligned, its spine sticking out just a fraction more than the others. I pulled it out, revealing nothing unusual at first. But as I flipped through the pages, a folded piece of paper slipped out and landed on the floor. I stared at it, hesitant to pick it up. Unfolding the paper, I found a handwritten note inside. The message was brief, written in neat, precise letters. It read, "Be careful what you trust." My hands trembled as I held the note, my mind racing to make sense of it. Who had written it? How had they entered the office without leaving any trace? And what were they trying to warn me about? The questions piled up, each more unsettling than the last. I sat back in my chair, clutching the note as I tried to piece everything together. The open door, the untouched office, the cryptic message, none of it added up. I felt a chill run down my spine as I considered the possibilities. Someone had clearly gone to great lengths to leave this message, but their intentions were unclear. Was it a warning, a threat, or something else entirely? As the day wore on, I found myself glancing over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. Every sound, every movement outside the office made me jump. I tried to focus on my work, but the mysterious events loomed over me, impossible to ignore. The words on the note replayed in my mind, their meaning as elusive as ever. I decided to take the note home with me, hoping to make sense of it later. As I locked the office door that evening, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief to leave the building. Still, the unease followed me, a lingering presence that refused to fade. I checked the lock twice before leaving, ensuring it was secure. The thought of returning the next day filled me with a mix of curiosity and dread. At home, I placed the note on my desk, staring at it as if it might reveal its secrets. I thought about contacting someone for help, but I was not sure who to trust. The message's warning seemed to apply even now, making me question everything. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I fell asleep, though my dreams were restless and filled with shadows. The next morning, I returned to the office with a sense of determination. I was not going to let fear control me. As I approached the door, I noticed something unusual. A small envelope had been slipped under it, waiting for me to find. My hands shook as I picked it up, bracing myself for whatever was inside. Opening it carefully, I found another note. This one read, "You are being watched." The words sent a jolt through me, but instead of fear, I felt a surge of defiance. Whoever was behind this wanted to intimidate me, but I refused to let them win. I placed the note in my bag and unlocked the door, stepping inside with a renewed sense of purpose. The office was just as I had left it, untouched and quiet. I sat at my desk, determined to uncover the truth. Over the next few days, I took extra precautions, documenting every detail and keeping a close eye on my surroundings. I even installed a small camera in the office, hidden from view. Despite my efforts, nothing unusual happened. The notes stopped, and the door remained locked when I returned from lunch. Slowly, the sense of unease began to fade, replaced by a cautious sense of relief. Weeks passed without incident, and life returned to normal. I never discovered who had left the notes or how they had entered the office. The mystery remained unsolved, but I chose to see it as a lesson. Trust is a fragile thing, and sometimes the best you can do is stay vigilant and protect what matters most. As time went on, the memory of that strange day became just another story, a reminder to always be careful. Story 3. I heard the soft shuffle of paper against my floor and looked toward the door. A thin, unmarked envelope peeked through the gap, catching my attention. I hesitated, unsure whether to pick it up or leave it there, but curiosity got the better of me. I walked over, crouched down, and slipped the envelope into my hands. The paper felt ordinary, but the weight of it seemed heavier than it should have been. I returned to the couch and carefully opened it, my fingers trembling slightly. Inside was a single black and white photo. It took a moment to recognize what I was looking at. It was me standing in the grocery store near the produce section. My stomach tightened as I stared at the photo, trying to make sense of how and why someone would send this to me. The clarity of the image made it clear that it had been taken recently, but I had no idea when. I flipped the photo over, hoping for some kind of explanation, but the back was blank. My heart began to race as unease crept through me. I could not remember seeing anyone suspicious at the grocery store, but the idea that someone had been watching me without my knowledge made me feel exposed. I stood up and checked the locks on my door, making sure everything was secure. Even though I lived on a higher floor, I checked the windows too, just in case. I sat back down and stared at the photo again, searching for any clues. There was nothing significant in the background, just shelves lined with fruits and vegetables. The angle of the photo suggested it had been taken from a distance, perhaps by someone pretending to browse nearby. The thought made my skin crawl. I tried to recall if anyone had been acting strangely while I was there, but my mind drew a blank. The more I thought about it, the more paranoid I felt. I grabbed my phone and debated whether to call the police. What would I even say? Someone sent me a creepy photo of myself, but there was no context, no threat, nothing actionable. I put the phone down and decided to let it go for the night, convincing myself it might just be some kind of prank. I tucked the photo back into the envelope and placed it on the coffee table. The next morning, the unease had not faded. I found myself glancing over my shoulder as I left my apartment and made my way to work. Every stranger I passed on the street seemed suspicious. Every glance in my direction felt deliberate. I tried to shake the feeling, but it clung to me like a shadow. By the time I reached my office, I was exhausted from the constant vigilance. I kept the photo in the back of my mind throughout the day, unable to fully focus on my tasks. During lunch, I decided to bring it up casually with a coworker. I described the situation without revealing too much, hoping for some perspective. They suggested it might have been a mistaken delivery or a harmless joke. Their dismissal made me feel slightly better, though not entirely reassured. When I returned home that evening, I half expected to find another envelope waiting for me. To my relief, there was nothing. Still, I could not shake the feeling of being watched. I went through my evening routine with extra caution, double-checking the locks again before settling in for the night. I even left a light on in the living room, something I had never done before. A few days passed without incident, and I started to relax. The photo remained on my coffee table, untouched but not forgotten. I tried to convince myself that it was a one-time occurrence and nothing more. Life gradually returned to normal, and the paranoia began to fade. I even managed to go grocery shopping again, though I was hyper-aware of my surroundings the entire time. Just when I thought it was over, I found another envelope waiting for me when I returned home one evening. This time it was propped against my doorframe, impossible to miss. My stomach dropped as I picked it up and brought it inside. I sat down and opened it with trembling hands, dreading what I might find. Inside was another photo, this one taken from a different angle. It was still me, but this time I was exiting the grocery store, holding a bag of groceries. The realization that someone had followed me outside made my blood run cold. Once again, there was no note, no explanation, just the photo. I felt a surge of anger mixed with fear as I stared at it, trying to make sense of what was happening. I decided I could not ignore it any longer and called the police. I explained the situation as clearly as I could, though I felt ridiculous describing it. They took my report seriously and sent an officer to my apartment to collect the photos. They assured me they would investigate, but I could tell there was not much they could do with so little information. Still, it felt slightly reassuring to know I had taken action. The following days were tense. I found myself looking over my shoulder constantly, feeling more paranoid than ever. I even started avoiding places I usually frequented, taking different routes to work and staying indoors as much as possible. Despite my efforts, I could not shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak in my apartment, every shadow outside my window, felt like a threat. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a faint noise outside my door. My heart raced as I grabbed a kitchen knife and crept toward the peephole. I could see a shadow moving in the hallway, but it was too dark to make out any details. I held my breath, waiting for the person to leave. After a few tense moments, the shadow disappeared, and I heard the faint sound of footsteps fading away. The next morning, I found another envelope. This one contained a photo of me inside my apartment, sitting on the couch. The realization that someone had been inside my home while I was unaware made me feel physically ill. I immediately called the police again, this time demanding they take the situation more seriously. They sent a team to Dust for fingerprints and installed a temporary surveillance camera outside my door. For days, I lived in a state of heightened anxiety, jumping at every sound and barely sleeping. The camera captured nothing unusual, and the police had no leads. I felt trapped, unable to go about my life without fear. I started contemplating moving to a new place, hoping to escape whatever this was. Then, one evening, I received a knock at my door. It was not the usual polite tap of a neighbor, but a forceful, deliberate knock that sent chills down my spine. I froze, unsure whether to answer or stay silent. The knock came again, louder this time. Summoning all my courage, I grabbed the knife and approached the door, peering through the peephole. To my surprise, it was one of the officers who had visited me earlier. I opened the door cautiously, keeping the chain lock engaged. The officer explained they had identified a suspect based on surveillance footage from a nearby building. It turned out to be someone who had been stalking me for weeks, a stranger with no clear motive. They had been apprehended and were in custody. Relief washed over me as the officer assured me that I was no longer in danger. I thanked them and closed the door, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders for the first time in weeks. That night, I finally slept peacefully, knowing the nightmare was over. Though the experience left me shaken, I felt grateful for the support and vowed to be more vigilant in the future. Story 4. I had been driving for hours, guided solely by the GPS that I trusted entirely. It had never failed me before, and I saw no reason to question its directions now. The sun had long dipped below the horizon, leaving the road ahead illuminated only by my car's headlights. I was heading to a small gathering in a town I had never been to before. The GPS calmly directed me through back roads, cutting through areas that seemed quieter and darker than I expected. The further I drove, the more the scenery shifted into something unsettling. Trees lined the narrow road, their branches forming eerie shapes under the moonlight. My signal faded, and I noticed the GPS routing itself more than once. The voice that usually provided reassurance now felt strangely out of place. I kept glancing at the clock, worried I might arrive too late, but the GPS assured me I was only minutes away from my destination. The road took a sudden turn, and the pavement transitioned into gravel. I slowed down, thinking this might be a shortcut to avoid traffic. Ahead, I noticed a shadowy structure emerging through the darkness. The GPS announced that I had arrived at my destination. Confused, I looked at the screen, which displayed nothing but a pin dropped in the middle of nowhere. My headlights illuminated an abandoned building that looked like it had been left to decay for years. I parked the car, hesitant to step out. The building loomed ahead, its windows shattered and its walls covered in graffiti. My first instinct was to double-check the address. I pulled out my phone, but there was no signal. The eerie silence of the place was unsettling, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves. I felt a chill run down my spine, though the air was warm. Something about the place felt off, but curiosity tugged at me. I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under my feet. The building's front door was slightly ajar, swaying gently as though inviting me inside. I thought about turning back and finding another route, but something compelled me to take a closer look. I grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment, its beam cutting through the darkness. As I approached the entrance, a faint sound caught my attention. It was almost like a whisper, but I convinced myself it was the wind. The interior was as unsettling as the exterior. Dust covered every surface, and the faint smell of dampness lingered in the air. Broken furniture was scattered across the floor, and the walls were marked with strange symbols. I called out, my voice echoing back to me. There was no response, but the feeling that I was not alone grew stronger. My heart raced as I debated whether to explore further or retreat to the safety of my car. I decided to take a few steps inside, my flashlight illuminating the eerie surroundings. Each creak of the floorboards beneath me sounded deafening in the stillness. As I moved further in, I noticed a staircase leading to the upper floors. Against my better judgment, I climbed it, my footsteps slow and deliberate. Halfway up, I heard what sounded like movement above me. My mind raced with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. Reaching the top, I found a long hallway with several rooms. The doors were either missing or hanging off their hinges, revealing empty spaces filled with shadows. I shone the flashlight into each room, finding nothing but decay and debris. Just as I was about to turn back, something caught my eye at the end of the hallway. A faint light flickered from one of the rooms, its source unclear. My breathing grew heavier as I approached it, my grip tightening on the flashlight. Inside the room, I found an old desk with a lit candle on top. The flame flickered despite the absence of wind, casting strange shadows on the walls. Next to the candle was an open notebook filled with handwriting that looked rushed and chaotic. The words were difficult to make out, but the phrases I could read sent shivers down my spine. They spoke of being watched, of not being able to leave, and of hearing whispers in the dark. I felt a sudden urge to leave, but my feet seemed rooted to the spot. A noise behind me snapped me out of my daze. I turned quickly, shining the flashlight down the hallway. There was nothing there, but the atmosphere felt heavier, almost suffocating. I made my way back toward the staircase, my steps quicker than before. The air seemed colder, and the whispers I had dismissed earlier now sounded clearer, though I still could not make out the words. Panic set in, and I broke into a run, nearly tripping on the uneven floorboards. Reaching the bottom of the stairs, I sprinted toward the entrance. As I stepped outside, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The car was still where I had left it, and I hurried to get inside. Locking the doors, I fumbled with the GPS, trying to reset it. The screen flickered, and for a moment it displayed an image of the building I had just left. I stared at it, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the image vanished, replaced by a route back to the main road. I started the car, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. The engine roared to life, and I wasted no time reversing out of the gravel lot. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The building stood silent and dark, its ominous presence fading into the distance. I tried to shake off the experience, telling myself it was just an error in the GPS and an overactive imagination. Yet, a part of me knew there was more to it than that. Eventually, I found my way back to a well-lit road, the familiarity of streetlights providing a sense of comfort. I arrived at my intended destination much later than planned, my mind still racing from what I had experienced. I chose not to mention the detour to anyone, unsure of how to explain it without sounding irrational. As the night went on, I tried to put it out of my mind, focusing instead on the company and the reason I had come. Days passed, and life returned to normal. Yet the memory of that night lingered, occasionally surfacing when I least expected it. I avoided using the GPS for a while, relying on maps and directions from others. Over time, I convinced myself that it had been nothing more than a strange coincidence, a glitch in technology leading me to an unsettling place. Still, I could not help but wonder what might have happened if I had stayed longer or explored further. One day, curiosity got the better of me, and I searched online for any information about the building. To my surprise, I found an article detailing its history. It had once been a school but was abandoned decades ago after a series of tragic events. Rumors of it being haunted had circulated for years, though most dismissed them as local folklore. Reading about it sent chills down my spine, but it also provided a sense of closure. I decided to let the experience remain in the past, a story to remind myself of the importance of trusting my instincts. The GPS error, the whispers, the notebook, they were all pieces of a puzzle I chose not to solve. Whatever had happened that night, I was grateful to have left unscathed. From that day forward, I made it a point to plan my routes carefully and never venture into unknown places without good reason. Story 5. While jogging in the park early in the morning, I found the cool air refreshing and invigorating. The sun had just started to rise, casting a soft orange hue across the horizon. The sound of my sneakers hitting the pavement created a steady rhythm, blending with the chirping of birds in the trees. I had chosen this time to jog because the park was typically peaceful, with only a few early rallies scattered around. It felt safe, and I enjoyed the sense of calm it brought before starting my day. After completing a couple of laps, I began to notice someone following the same route as me. At first, I thought it might just be a coincidence. People often jog in the same direction to maintain a steady flow and avoid collisions. I glanced over my shoulder briefly and saw a man jogging at a moderate pace, keeping a fair distance behind me. Shrugging it off, I continued, thinking little of it. As I kept jogging, the presence of the man started to feel less like a coincidence. No matter how many times I varied my speed or turned onto different paths, he was always there, trailing me. My usual loop around the park took about 20 minutes, but I realized he had been following me for over an hour. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that he might just be another regular jogger who preferred a similar route. Still, the uneasiness crept in, making it hard to ignore. I decided to test my suspicion by abruptly switching to a different trail that curved sharply away from my usual path. This trail was less crowded, winding through a quieter section of the park surrounded by tall trees. As I slowed down to catch my breath, I listened carefully for footsteps behind me. Sure enough, within moments I heard them steady and deliberate, echoing my pace. The realization sent a chill down my spine. I tried to maintain my composure, convincing myself not to panic. Looking around, I noted a few scattered joggers in the distance, but no one was close enough to notice my situation. I weighed my options carefully, unsure of how to handle this growing fear. It seemed wiser to stay calm and alert rather than make any rash decisions. I decided to take out my phone, pretending to check a message while discreetly looking at the man behind me. He was dressed in a simple tracksuit, his expression unreadable as he kept his focus on the path ahead. There was nothing overtly threatening about his appearance, but his persistence was unnerving. I considered calling someone for help but hesitated, worried about overreacting if this turned out to be harmless. To test him further, I slowed my pace considerably, almost coming to a stop. I bent down, pretending to tie my shoelace, and waited to see what he would do. He slowed down too, keeping the same distance between us. My heart raced as I realized this was no longer a coincidence. He was intentionally following me. The park, which had once felt so serene and welcoming, now felt unfamiliar and menacing. I quickly decided to head toward a more crowded area where I could be surrounded by people. Adjusting my pace, I jogged toward the main loop where the morning crowd was starting to gather. The sound of children laughing and people chatting offered a small sense of comfort. Even in the crowded area, the man did not stop following me. He kept his distance but remained within sight, blending into the background. My mind raced with possibilities. Was he waiting for the right moment to approach me, or was there some other reason for his behavior? I tried to recall any moment earlier when I might have accidentally crossed paths with him or drawn his attention, but nothing stood out. I decided to stop at a bench near a group of people and pretend to take a break. Sitting down, I scanned the area discreetly, hoping to spot any signs that he might give up and leave. He stopped a few meters away, leaning against a tree as though he were also taking a break. It was clear now that he had no intention of going anywhere. I considered confronting him but worried that it might escalate the situation. Instead, I decided to text someone, letting them know where I was and what was happening. Typing out the message quickly, I sent it to a friend, hoping they could at least call or come meet me. The sense of isolation was overwhelming, despite being surrounded by people. As I sat there trying to calm my nerves, I noticed a park security guard patrolling the area. Relief washed over me as I stood up and approached him, keeping an eye on the man behind me. I explained the situation quietly, pointing him out and describing how he had been following me for over an hour. The guard nodded and assured me he would look into it. The guard walked toward the man, who seemed to notice and immediately started jogging away. I watched as the guard tried to follow him, but the man quickly disappeared down one of the winding trails. Though he was gone, I still felt uneasy, as if his presence lingered in the air. I stayed close to the security guard for a while, grateful for his assistance but unable to shake the fear that had taken hold of me. After a few minutes, I decided it was time to leave the park. The thought of finishing my jog no longer appealed to me. Instead, I walked quickly toward the exit, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. Once I was out of the park and on the main road, the sense of relief was almost overwhelming. The bustling sounds of cars and people going about their day felt oddly comforting. I kept my phone in my hand, ready to call for help if needed, but the man never reappeared. Reflecting on the experience, I realized how important it was to trust my instincts. That sense of unease had been my first warning, and I was grateful I had listened to it. Though nothing terrible had happened, the encounter served as a reminder to stay vigilant and aware of my surroundings. The following day, I changed my jogging routine completely, choosing a different park and bringing a friend along. The experience had shaken me, but I was determined not to let it take away my love for jogging. I also made sure to inform others about what had happened, encouraging them to stay safe and alert during their own outings. Over time, the fear faded, replaced by a stronger sense of caution and preparedness. I learned to trust myself more, understanding that it was better to act on suspicion than to ignore it. Though I would never know the man's intentions, I was thankful that the situation had ended without harm. The park eventually became a place of peace for me again, but I never forgot the lesson I had learned that day. Story 6. I was sitting in the living room, finally enjoying a moment of quiet after a long day. My baby had been restless earlier, and it took a while to settle them into a peaceful sleep. The baby monitor sat on the coffee table, its screen glowing softly, displaying the dimly lit nursery. I sipped my tea and kept my eyes on the monitor, listening to the faint hum of the white noise machine in the background. The soft static was comforting until I heard something that made me freeze. It was subtle at first, just a slight difference in the rhythm of the noise. I leaned closer, placing the mug down and focusing entirely on the monitor. The sound grew louder, unmistakably heavy breathing. My chest tightened as I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. I grabbed the monitor, studying the grainy image of the nursery. The crib was still, the baby sleeping soundly under the gentle glow of the nightlight. My eyes scanned every corner of the room, searching for movement or shadows, but there was nothing unusual. The breathing continued, deep and raspy, as if someone was standing right next to the monitor's microphone. My pulse quickened, and I stood up, unsure of what to do. The rational part of me wanted to believe it was a technical glitch, perhaps interference from another device, but the sound was so vivid, so human, that it sent shivers down my spine. I hesitated, wondering if I should go check the nursery or call for help. The idea of stepping into that room with the possibility of someone being there made my skin crawl. I forced myself to take a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. Gripping the monitor tightly, I made my way to the nursery. The hallway felt longer than usual, the shadows on the walls shifting as I walked past. When I reached the door, I hesitated, listening for any sound beyond it. There was nothing but silence now, the heavy breathing on the monitor gone. I pushed the door open slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The nursery looked exactly as it should. The crib was undisturbed, the baby sleeping peacefully. I stepped inside, my eyes darting to every corner, checking behind the curtains, and even peeking into the closet. There was no sign of anyone, no explanation for what I had heard. Feeling a mix of relief and lingering unease, I stood by the crib and watched the baby for a moment. They were safe, their tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. I placed a hand on the edge of the crib, reassuring myself that everything was fine. Still, the sound of that breathing echoed in my mind, refusing to be dismissed. I returned to the living room, clutching the monitor as if it were some kind of shield. The screen was still clear, showing the quiet nursery. I sat down, but my sense of calm was gone. Every small noise in the house made me jump, and I kept glancing at the monitor, expecting something to happen. Hours passed and nothing unusual occurred. I began convincing myself it must have been interference after all. Perhaps another baby monitor in the neighborhood had accidentally synced with mine. The thought was unsettling, but far less terrifying than the alternatives my imagination had conjured. The next day, I decided to replace the monitor with a newer model, one with better security features. I told myself it was just a precaution, something to ease my mind. Life returned to normal, and the incident began to fade into the back of my mind. A few weeks later, I was sitting in the same spot, the new monitor on the table beside me. The nursery was quiet, the baby sleeping peacefully once again. I had almost forgotten about this strange occurrence until the breathing returned. This time it was even louder, more distinct. My stomach dropped as I stared at the monitor, the same sense of dread washing over me. I grabbed my phone, ready to call someone, anyone, for help. My fingers trembled as I dialed, but before the call connected, the breathing stopped. The monitor showed nothing but the sleeping baby in the familiar nursery. I hung up, unsure of what to say if someone answered. What could I explain? That I heard breathing through a device, but everything looked normal. Determined not to let fear control me, I decided to set up a camera in the nursery, one that recorded everything. If there was something or someone in the room, I would have proof. I installed it the next day, ensuring it was discreet but had a clear view of the crib and the surrounding area. That night, I watched the live feed from my phone, the monitor sitting on the table as usual. Hours passed without incident, and I began to feel foolish for going to such lengths. Just as I was about to put the phone down and try to sleep, the breathing returned. My hands went cold as I stared at the monitor and then at the camera feed on my phone. The sound was unmistakable, but both screens showed the same thing: an empty room and a sleeping baby. I played back the footage from the camera, rewinding to when the breathing started. My heart raced as I watched the video, searching for any sign of movement or shadows. There was nothing. The breathing had no source, no explanation. It was as if it came from the air itself. The following days were filled with paranoia and exhaustion. I barely slept, constantly checking the monitor and the camera feed. I even considered moving the crib into my bedroom, but something told me the strange occurrences would follow. It was not the nursery, it was something else entirely. One evening, as I sat in the living room, I decided to confront whatever it was. I spoke aloud, addressing the empty room. I told it that this was my home, that my child was off limits, and that it needed to leave. My voice shook, but I felt a strange sense of empowerment. I had no idea if it would work, but I needed to try. The breathing never returned after that night. The monitor remained quiet, and the camera recorded nothing unusual. Slowly, the tension in the house lifted, and life began to feel normal again. I never found out what caused the breathing, and part of me did not want to know. It was enough that my child was safe, and that the unsettling presence seemed to be gone. Even now, I sometimes think back to those nights and the fear I felt. I wonder if it was something paranormal, a glitch, or just my mind playing tricks on me. Whatever it was, I learned to trust my instincts and to protect my child above all else. The experience left me shaken but also stronger, more determined to face whatever challenges life might throw my way. Story 7. I woke up earlier than usual, greeted by the faint light of dawn spilling through the curtains. I stretched, enjoying the quiet stillness of the morning, but something felt off. There was an uneasiness in the air that I could not quite place. My routine was to get out of bed, head straight to the kitchen, and start the coffee maker. But today my mind urged me to check the house first. It was not a conscious decision, more like an instinct I could not ignore. Walking through the hallway, I noticed that everything seemed untouched. The framed photographs were still neatly aligned on the walls, and there were no signs of disturbance. As I approached the living room, I stopped in my tracks. The front door was ajar, barely open, but enough to send a chill down my spine. I always double-checked the locks before going to bed, a habit I had since childhood. Yet here it was, unlocked and slightly open. I hesitated before stepping closer, the creak of the floorboards beneath my feet the only sound breaking the silence. I reached out and pushed the door fully open, peering outside. The early morning air was cool and still, the street empty of movement. My heart pounded as I scanned the porch and the driveway, searching for anything out of the ordinary. Nothing seemed amiss, but the fact that the door was unlocked was enough to make me uneasy. I closed the door and locked it, this time triple-checking to ensure it was secure. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it. I knew I had locked it before bed. I could even remember the exact moment I turned the key, the satisfying click echoing in the quiet night. The thought that someone could have entered while I was asleep sent a shiver down my spine. I decided to check the rest of the house. Room by room, I searched for any signs of an intruder. The kitchen was just as I had left it, with dishes neatly stacked in the sink and the coffee maker ready to go. The living room showed no signs of disturbance, the couch cushions perfectly in place, and the television remote sitting untouched on the coffee table. Even the windows were all locked, their latches firmly in place. Still, the feeling of unease would not leave me. The last place to check was the bedroom. I returned and carefully examined the space, my eyes scanning every corner for anything that seemed out of place. My closet doors were closed, the drawers undisturbed, and nothing appeared to be missing. Yet, I could not shake the feeling that someone had been in the house. It was an unsettling thought, one that made me question my own memory. I tried to convince myself that maybe I had simply forgotten to lock the door, though the idea seemed absurd. I was meticulous about it every single night. Still, I forced myself to go about my morning routine, brewing a cup of coffee and settling down at the kitchen table. The house felt eerily quiet, and every little sound seemed amplified in the stillness. As the hours passed, I found myself checking the door repeatedly, almost compulsively. Each time I made sure it was locked and secure. Despite my efforts to push the thought aside, my mind kept returning to the same question: had someone been inside? The possibility gnawed at me, making it impossible to focus on anything else. I decided to go outside and inspect the surroundings. The porch was empty, with no footprints or signs of disturbance. The driveway was clear, and the lawn looked untouched. I walked around the perimeter of the house, checking the windows and doors again from the outside. Everything appeared normal, which only added to my confusion. Back inside, I considered calling someone for advice, but I did not want to sound paranoid. I told myself that maybe I was overthinking it, that there was no real reason to worry. But deep down, I knew something was not right. I could not shake the feeling of being watched, as if unseen eyes were on me even in the safety of my home. By midday, the feeling of unease had grown unbearable. I decided to install a security camera near the front door, something I had considered in the past but never acted on. The idea of having footage to review if something like this happened again gave me a small sense of control. I set up the camera and tested it, ensuring it would record everything that happened near the entrance. That night, I went through my usual routine, locking the door and double-checking every window before heading to bed. I left the hallway light on, a habit I had not practiced in years, but it gave me a sense of comfort. As I lay in bed, my thoughts raced, replaying the events of the morning over and over. Sleep did not come easily, but eventually exhaustion took over. The next morning, I woke up feeling slightly more at ease. The door was still locked, and the house appeared just as I had left it. I checked the security camera footage, relieved to see that nothing unusual had been recorded during the night. It was a small victory, but it helped restore a sense of normalcy. Over the next few days, I made an effort to stick to my routines and not let the incident consume me. I checked camera footage regularly and was relieved to find no signs of suspicious activity. Slowly, the unease began to fade, replaced by a cautious sense of security. I still did not have an explanation for what had happened, but I reminded myself that sometimes things could be more benign than they seemed. Weeks later, as I sat at the kitchen table sipping my morning coffee, I reflected on how the experience had changed me. I had taken steps to make my home more secure, and I was more mindful of my surroundings. The fear and paranoia had been replaced by a quiet confidence, a reminder of my resilience in the face of uncertainty. Whatever had happened that night, it no longer held power over me. Story 8. The snow had fallen heavily overnight, blanketing everything in a thick, pristine layer. The morning air was cold, and I could feel the chill even before stepping out of bed. As I sipped my coffee and gazed out the living room window, I admired the untouched beauty of the fresh snowfall. It was one of those mornings where everything seemed peaceful, almost too still. That was when I noticed something odd outside, faint impressions in the snow that did not belong. At first, I thought it might have been an animal wandering near the house. I leaned closer to the glass, squinting to make sense of the shapes. The prints were too large for an animal, though, and they had a distinctive pattern that could only have been made by boots. They began at the edge of the woods behind my property and led directly toward the house. My pulse quickened as I traced their path with my eyes. The footprints meandered across the yard, making a beeline for the back of the house. I hurried to the kitchen, feeling a growing unease. The snow outside the kitchen window was no longer smooth and undisturbed. The prints stopped directly beneath the window, where the snow was compressed, showing that someone had been standing there. I froze, staring at the evidence of an unknown visitor. My mind raced with questions about who could have been there and why. I immediately checked the locks on all the doors and windows, making sure everything was secure. Nothing appeared to be broken or tampered with, but the thought of someone being that close to the house while I slept unsettled me deeply. I grabbed my phone and debated whether to call for help, but I felt foolish reporting footprints in the snow. It could have been a neighbor or someone lost in the storm. Still, I could not shake the feeling that something was not right. The rest of the day, I found myself glancing out the windows, checking for any signs of movement. The footprints remained stark and clear against the white snow, a constant reminder of the earlier discovery. By late afternoon, the sky began to darken, and I decided to step outside to inspect them more closely. Bundling up in my coat and boots, I carefully followed the prints from the edge of the woods to the house. The closer I got, the more I noticed details that made my skin crawl. The prints were deliberate, each step evenly spaced, as if whoever had made them knew exactly where they were going. There was no indication of hesitation or wandering. When I reached the window, I could see that the person had stood there for some time. The snow was disturbed in a way that suggested shifting feet, as though they were waiting or watching. I turned to look at the woods, half expecting to see someone lurking among the trees. The shadows were long and dark, and the bare branches swayed gently in the wind. My breath fogged in the cold air as I stood there, scanning the tree line for any signs of movement. Nothing stirred, but the silence felt heavy, almost oppressive. I backed away from the window, following my own tracks back to the door. Inside, I locked the door behind me and sat down at the kitchen table. My thoughts were scattered as I tried to make sense of what had happened. It could have been harmless, I told myself. Perhaps someone seeking shelter from the cold or a hunter passing through. But why would they stop at the window? The unease that had settled in my chest refused to go away. That night, I could not sleep. Every sound made me jump, from the creaking of the house settling to the howling of the wind outside. I kept checking the locks, even though I knew they were secure. Hours passed, and I eventually dozed off on the couch, only to wake with a start to the sound of something outside. It was faint, barely audible over the wind, but it was enough to make my heart race. I crept to the window, careful not to make any noise. Peering out into the darkness, I strained to see anything unusual. At first, all I saw was the same untouched snow, except for the footprints that remained from earlier. But then I noticed something else, a new set of prints that had not been there before. These were fresher, the edges still crisp, leading away from the house and back toward the woods. Panic gripped me as I realized that someone had returned while I slept. I grabbed my phone and dialed for help, explaining the situation to the operator as calmly as I could. They assured me that an officer would be dispatched to check the area. While I waited, I paced the living room, unable to sit still. My eyes kept darting to the windows, half expecting to see a face staring back at me. When the officer arrived, I stepped outside to meet them, feeling both relieved and embarrassed. I explained everything, pointing out the footprints and describing what I had heard. The officer nodded, taking notes and shining their flashlight on the prints. They followed the trail into the woods while I waited near the house, my breath visible in the cold night air. After what felt like an eternity, the officer returned. They had not found anyone, but they assured me they would patrol the area and keep an eye out for anything unusual. I thanked them and went back inside, locking the door behind me. The rest of the night passed in a tense, Sleepless haze, every creak and groan of the house amplified by my heightened senses. The next morning I ventured outside again, unable to resist the urge to see if anything had changed. The new set of prints was still there, leading from the house to the woods, but there was no sign of who had made them. The snow had started to fall again, slowly covering the evidence. As unsettling as the experience had been, I hoped that whoever it was would not return. Days passed, and the incident began to fade from my mind. The snow eventually melted, taking the footprints with it. I went back to my routine, though I found myself being more cautious, double-checking the locks and keeping the curtains drawn at night. The sense of safety I had once felt in my home was gone, replaced by a lingering unease. One evening, as I sat by the fire reading, I heard a faint knock at the door. My heart leaped into my throat as I froze, staring at the entrance. The knock came again, soft but deliberate. Taking a deep breath, I approached the door and peered through the peephole. To my surprise, it was a delivery person holding a package. I opened the door cautiously, and they handed me the box with a polite smile. Thanking them, I closed the door and placed the package on the table. It was addressed to me, but there was no return address. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, revealing a small, handmade wooden carving of a bird. There was no note or explanation, just the intricately crafted figure. I stared at the carving, trying to make sense of it. Was it a gesture of kindness or something more sinister? The craftsmanship was beautiful, almost too perfect, as though it had been made with great care. I placed it on the mantel, unsure of what else to do. That night, I dreamt of the woods and the footprints, the feeling of being watched never quite leaving me. Over time, the memory of the footprints faded, though I never completely forgot. I began to see the carving as a reminder to be vigilant and aware of my surroundings. Life went on, and nothing unusual happened again. The snow fell once more, covering the ground in its pristine white blanket, but this time there were no footprints to disturb its surface. Story 9. In the quiet hours of the night, I woke up to the faint glow of my cell phone screen. I reached out groggily to turn it off, assuming I had received a notification, but the screen displayed an active call. The number was one I did not recognize, and the call had already been ongoing for several seconds. My heart started to race as I tried to make sense of how my phone could have dialed this number on its own. Confused and slightly unsettled, I quickly ended the call and placed the phone back on the bedside table. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, I could not shake off the eerie feeling creeping up my spine. I grabbed my phone again, this time unlocking it to check the call history. Sure enough, the unknown number was listed as the most recent outgoing call, but I had no memory of dialing it. I began to wonder if I had somehow pocket-dialed it before going to bed, but my phone had been on the table the entire time. The rational part of my mind told me it was a technical glitch, yet my instincts hinted at something else. Trying to calm my nerves, I decided to Google the number, hoping to find some clarity. The results came up empty, with no listings or matches that could explain who it belonged to. I considered blocking the number to avoid any further disturbances, but something stopped me. My curiosity was stronger than my fear, and I found myself hesitating to take action. Instead, I set the phone down and tried to convince myself that it was nothing more than a strange coincidence. Minutes passed, and just as I was beginning to drift back to sleep, my phone vibrated. The screen lit up with a notification of a missed call, and my stomach churned when I saw it was from the same number. I hesitated before picking up the phone, my thumb hovering over the screen. Instead of returning the call, I opened the messaging app to see if there were any texts from the number. There was nothing in the inbox, which only deepened the mystery surrounding the situation. The next morning, the events of the previous night lingered in my mind as I went about my day. I told myself to let it go, but the thought of my phone dialing that number on its own kept nagging at me. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to reach out to my mobile service provider. After explaining what had happened, the representative assured me they would investigate the matter. They suggested it could be a case of spoofing, where someone disguises their number as mine to make it seem like I initiated the call. That explanation gave me some comfort, though it did not completely ease my concerns. For the next few days, I kept a close eye on my phone, making sure there were no further incidents. Just as I was beginning to believe the situation was resolved, it happened again. This time, it was in the middle of the afternoon while I was at work. I noticed my phone screen lighting up on the desk, and to my shock, it was dialing the same number without any input from me. My pulse quickened as I watched the phone make the call. I quickly ended it, but the unease I felt was overwhelming. I wondered if my phone had been hacked or if there was something more sinister at play. To rule out any technical issues, I performed a factory reset on my device, erasing all data and starting fresh. I hoped this would put an end to the strange occurrences, but I could not ignore the growing sense of dread that accompanied the mystery. Days turned into weeks, and the calls stopped entirely, allowing me to relax and return to normal. Then, late one night, the phone rang, jolting me awake. The same unknown number was calling, and for reasons I could not explain, I decided to answer it this time. I held my breath as I brought the phone to my ear, waiting for some indication of who was on the other end. There was no voice, no sound, just an empty silence that sent chills down my spine. I stayed on the line, listening intently for anything that might provide a clue, but the silence was unyielding. Eventually, I hung up and sat in bed, feeling more confused than ever. I began to wonder if someone was playing a cruel prank on me, or if there was an explanation I had yet to consider. As unsettling as the experience was, I resolved to confront it head-on. The next day, I contacted a private investigator to help trace the number and uncover the truth. The investigator was thorough, but even they could not find much information. The number was unregistered and appeared to be tied to a disposable device. They suggested it might be a case of harassment or someone attempting to intimidate me. I felt a mix of frustration and relief at their findings. While it was comforting to know there was no immediate danger, the lack of answers left me with more questions than ever. One evening, as I was scrolling through old messages on my phone, I noticed something I had overlooked before. A faint timestamp next to the unknown number indicated that a text had been sent from my phone during one of the outgoing calls. My hands trembled as I opened the message to see what had been written. The text was brief, containing a single word: help. The discovery sent shockwaves through me, and I felt my heart pounding in my chest. I had no memory of typing or sending that message, and I was certain no one else had access to my phone. I thought back to the investigator's suggestion that someone might be harassing me, but this felt different. It felt as though my phone itself was trying to communicate with me, or perhaps something else entirely. Determined to make sense of it all, I revisited every detail of the events that had unfolded. I began to piece together a timeline, noting the times and dates of each call and comparing them to my own schedule. A chilling pattern began to emerge, with each call occurring during moments when I was alone or vulnerable. It was as if someone or something was watching me and waiting for the right moment to act. Despite the fear that gripped me, I refused to let it control my life. I changed my phone number, installed new security measures, and remained vigilant. Over time, the calls and messages ceased entirely, and I allowed myself to believe the ordeal was finally over. Life returned to normal, and I began to put the strange events behind me. One day, months later, I received a letter in the mail from an unknown sender. Inside was a handwritten note with a single sentence that read, "Thank you for answering the call." I stared at the note in disbelief, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It was a cryptic message, but it carried an odd sense of finality that I could not explain. Although I never fully understood what had happened, I chose to see the experience as a reminder to trust my instincts and stay resilient in the face of uncertainty. Whatever the true nature of those calls, they no longer held power over me. I had faced the unknown and come out stronger, ready to move forward with my life. Story 10. Then, the rain was still falling in a steady rhythm when I got into my car, shaking the water off my umbrella and setting it on the passenger seat. I had been in a rush earlier, so the interior was still a bit cluttered with receipts, coffee cups, and a jacket tossed haphazardly in the back seat. As I adjusted my seatbelt, my eyes caught sight of a small piece of paper peeking out from under the edge of the passenger seat. It was a shopping receipt, folded neatly as if someone had placed it there deliberately. At first I thought it might be mine, but when I unfolded it and scanned the items, confusion immediately set in. The receipt listed items I would never buy: expensive cologne, a leather wallet, and an upscale brand of wine I had never even heard of. The date and time on the receipt made my stomach drop. It was from earlier that afternoon, just a couple of hours before. I had not been shopping that day, let alone at the store listed on the receipt. I glanced around the car as if expecting to find someone hiding in the shadows, even though I knew that was impossible. The windows were fogged from the rain, and the faint hum of the engine was the only sound breaking the silence. My mind raced as I tried to figure out how the receipt had gotten there. I thought back to the day's events, trying to piece together any clues. I had parked my car at the office in the morning, only leaving briefly to grab a quick lunch at a drive-thru. My car had been locked the entire time, and as far as I could tell, there was no sign of a break-in. I checked the doors and windows again, even though I already knew they were secure. The more I thought about it, the more unsettled I felt. Who could have left the receipt, and why would they do it? My first instinct was to dismiss it as a simple mix-up. Maybe someone had accidentally dropped the receipt, and it had somehow blown into my car while I was parked. But the receipt's placement, neatly tucked under the passenger seat, did not feel accidental. I decided to look more closely at the receipt, hoping to find something that would make sense of the situation. The store's name was printed at the top, along with the exact time of the purchase. There was also a loyalty card number listed, which seemed oddly specific. I did not have a loyalty card for that store, and the name of the cashier at the bottom was unfamiliar. I could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. I checked the trunk and the back seat for any other signs of tampering, but everything seemed normal. Still, the unease lingered, and I could not ignore it. I decided to drive to the store listed on the receipt, thinking it might give me some answers. The rain continued to pour as I navigated through the streets, the windshield wipers working furiously to keep up. My mind was a whirl of possibilities, none of them comforting. When I arrived at the store, I parked in a far corner of the lot and sat for a moment, debating whether this was even a good idea. The fluorescent lights of the store cast a harsh glow on the wet pavement, and shoppers moved in and out, clutching bags and umbrellas. I finally gathered my courage and stepped out into the rain, the receipt clutched tightly in my hand. Inside, the store was busy but not chaotic, and I made my way to the customer service desk. I handed the receipt to the clerk and explained that I had found it in my car, though I left out my suspicions. The clerk glanced at the receipt and frowned. They typed the loyalty card number into the computer, and after a moment, their expression shifted to one of mild surprise. They told me the card belonged to someone who was a regular customer and had indeed made the purchase earlier that day. When I asked if they could describe the person, they hesitated but eventually said they could not release that kind of information. Feeling frustrated, I thanked them and left the store. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the receipt and trying to make sense of it. If the person who made the purchase was a regular customer, how had their receipt ended up in my car? Did they know me, or had it been a random act? The questions were endless, and I had no answers. I decided to head home, hoping that a night's sleep might help me think more clearly. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed determination to figure out what had happened. I went through my car again, this time checking every nook and cranny for anything I might have missed. In the glove compartment, I found a small piece of paper that did not belong to me. It was a handwritten note, short and cryptic, that read, "Check the parking lot camera footage." My heart raced as I read the words. Someone had left this note deliberately and they wanted me to see it. I remembered the office parking lot had cameras, but accessing the footage would not be easy. I called the building manager and explained that I needed to review the footage for a personal matter. After some persuasion, they agreed to let me come in and take a look. When I arrived, the manager led me to a small room filled with monitors and playback equipment. They pulled up the footage from the time frame I had given them and fast-forwarded through the recordings. What I saw sent a chill down my spine. A figure in a dark hoodie approached my car, glancing around nervously before slipping something inside through the slightly open window. The timestamp showed it had happened while I was at my desk, completely unaware. The figure moved quickly, disappearing from the frame within seconds. Their face was obscured, and there was no way to identify them from the footage. I left the building with more questions than answers. Whoever had left the receipt and the note clearly wanted me to notice, but their intentions were still a mystery. I decided to take the receipt to the police, hoping they could make sense of it. The officer who took my statement seemed intrigued but not overly concerned. They said they would look into it and let me know if they found anything. Days passed, and I heard nothing. I tried to put the incident out of my mind, but it lingered like a shadow, always at the edge of my thoughts. Then, one evening, I received a call from the police. They had tracked down the owner of the loyalty card and wanted me to come in for a follow-up. When I arrived at the station, the officer explained that the cardholder had reported their wallet stolen a few days before the receipt was left in my car. They believed the thief had used the card to make the purchases and then discarded the receipt. The revelation was both a relief and a new source of unease. If the receipt had been discarded, why had it been placed so deliberately in my car? The officer suggested it might have been a coincidence, but I was not convinced. Still, there was little more they could do without additional evidence. In the weeks that followed, I kept a close watch on my surroundings, double-checking that my car was locked and being cautious about where I parked. The incident gradually faded from my daily thoughts, though it never entirely disappeared. Then, one morning I found another note on my windshield. This one simply said, "You are safe now." I stood there in the crisp morning air, staring at the note and feeling a mix of emotions. Relief, confusion, and a lingering sense of unease all vied for my attention. Whoever had been involved seemed to want me to know that the ordeal was over, but their identity and motives remained a mystery. I decided to take the note at face value and move forward, grateful that the strange chapter appeared to have come to an end. Story 11. I woke up feeling uneasy, though I could not quite pinpoint why. The morning light streamed through my windows as I went about my routine, but a strange heaviness lingered in the air. After brewing a cup of coffee, I decided to check the footage from the security cameras I had installed outside the house. It was something I had started doing every morning since the unsettling incidents with my neighbor. I scrolled through the footage, half expecting to find nothing unusual, but what I saw froze me in place. There was a figure standing at my front door in the dead of night. The timestamp read 2:17 a.m. and the figure remained there for what felt like an eternity. As I fast-forwarded through the footage, I realized the person did not leave until 2:47 a.m. 30 minutes of standing completely still, facing my door, with no movement other than a slight tilt of the head. My stomach churned as I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The person wore dark clothing, and their face was obscured by the shadow of the porch light. I replayed the footage several times, hoping to catch a detail I might have missed. Each time, the unease in my chest grew heavier. I tried to recall if I had heard anything during the night: footsteps, a knock, or even the faint creak of the porch boards, but nothing came to mind. The thought of someone being so close to me while I slept made my skin crawl. I immediately saved the footage and decided to call the authorities. When I explained what I had seen, the dispatcher assured me they would send an officer to take a report. While I waited, I could not stop pacing the house, glancing nervously at the front door every few minutes. It felt like the safe space I had worked so hard to protect was crumbling again. My heart raced every time I thought about what might have happened if they had tried to come inside. I double-checked the locks on every door and window, feeling a surge of panic at the thought of any weak spots in my defenses. The officer arrived about an hour later, and I showed him the footage. He watched it carefully, his expression growing more serious with each passing moment. He asked if I had noticed anyone suspicious in the neighborhood recently, or if I had any reason to believe someone might target me. I told him about the previous incidents with the neighbor, but I admitted I had no concrete evidence linking them to what I had seen on the camera. He nodded and promised to add patrols in the area, advising me to stay vigilant. The officer's reassurance helped a little, but it did not erase the image of that figure standing at my door. I spent the rest of the day trying to go about my usual routine, but the unease lingered. Every little sound made me jump, and I found myself checking the security feed every hour. The footage played over and over in my mind, each frame fueling my growing paranoia. By evening, I was exhausted, both physically and mentally, but the thought of going to bed filled me with dread. That night, I left every light in the house on and kept my phone by my side. Sleep did not come easily, and every creak of the house felt magnified in the silence. At one point, I thought I heard a faint tapping sound, but when I checked the cameras, there was nothing there. The anxiety was suffocating, and I found myself questioning whether I was overreacting or not cautious enough. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I drifted into a restless sleep. The next morning, I checked the footage again as soon as I woke up. To my relief, there was no sign of anyone near my house during the night. Still, the memory of the figure from the night before haunted me. I decided to take additional precautions, installing stronger locks and motion-activated floodlights around the property. I also shared the footage with a trusted friend, hoping to get their perspective. They were just as disturbed as I was, urging me to stay alert and not hesitate to call for help if anything else happened. Days passed without incident, but the fear remained. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, always looking over my shoulder and scanning the street for anything unusual. It was exhausting living in a constant state of vigilance, but I refused to let my guard down. Then, one evening, I noticed something that sent my anxiety spiraling again. A small object had been left on my porch, a single, unmarked envelope. My hands trembled as I picked it up, debating whether to open it or call the authorities immediately. Curiosity got the better of me, and I carefully opened the envelope, half expecting to find a note inside. Instead, it was empty. The lack of content felt deliberate, as if whoever left it wanted to send a message without saying anything at all. I called the authorities again, reporting the incident and handing over the envelope for fingerprints or any other evidence. The officer who responded this time was kind but firm, advising me to consider staying elsewhere for a while if I felt unsafe. I appreciated the concern, but the thought of leaving my home felt like admitting defeat. I decided to stay, doubling down on my security measures and enlisting the help of a friend to install additional cameras. If whoever was doing this thought they could intimidate me, I wanted to show them I was not an easy target. Weeks went by with no further incidents, and I began to feel a tentative sense of relief. The authorities checked in periodically, updating me on their patrols and assuring me they were keeping an eye on the situation. Life slowly returned to normal, though I remained cautious and alert. The experience had shaken me deeply, but it also made me more determined to protect myself and my home. Eventually, the fear that had gripped me began to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence. I had faced my worst fears and come out stronger on the other side. My house once again felt like a sanctuary, a place where I could feel safe and at peace. Though I would never forget the unsettling figure at my door, I refused to let them dictate how I lived my life. The cameras continued to watch over my home, a silent reminder of the resilience and strength I had found within myself. Story 12. Alf. When I first saw the message, my heart skipped a beat. The words were simple but chilling. I am watching you. The sender's number was unfamiliar, and no name was attached. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. Was this some kind of joke, or was it something more sinister? A shiver ran through me as I read the message again, each word sinking deeper into my thoughts. I quickly checked my surroundings, my eyes scanning the room for anything unusual. Everything seemed normal, just the familiar comfort of my home. Yet the message had me on edge. I considered ignoring it, but my curiosity got the better of me. I typed a quick reply. "Who is this?" My hands trembled slightly as I pressed send. The waiting felt endless, each second stretching out uncomfortably long. No response came. The minutes dragged on, and I found myself checking my phone repeatedly, hoping for an answer. My mind raced through possibilities. It could have been a prank, but from who? I could not think of anyone who would find this kind of message funny. The alternative that it was serious was even more unsettling. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but the unease lingered. I decided to block the number, hoping that would put an end to it. Still, I could not shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I drew the curtains and locked the doors, trying to create a barrier between myself and the unknown sender. Sitting down, I forced myself to focus on something else, but the thought of that message kept creeping back. It was like a shadow that refused to leave. Later that evening, my phone buzzed again. My heart jumped as I reached for it, dreading what I might see. It was a new message from a different number. "You cannot block me," it read. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the screen. How could they know I had blocked the first number? Panic began to set in. This was no prank, it was deliberate, calculated. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? A stranger sent me a text message, and I felt threatened. There was no proof that I was in any real danger. Still, the idea of doing nothing felt unbearable. I decided to document everything, taking screenshots of the messages and noting the times they were sent. If this continued, I would at least have evidence to show someone. Sleep did not come easily that night. Every sound made me jump, and every shadow seemed suspicious. My phone stayed on the nightstand, its screen dark but constantly drawing my attention. I kept expecting another message, but none came. By morning, I felt drained, my nerves frayed from the sleepless night. The sunlight brought some comfort, though the anxiety remained. The next day, I tried to go about my routine as usual. I told myself not to overreact, that it was probably just someone trying to scare me for no reason. Still, I found myself looking over my shoulder more often than usual. Every unfamiliar face seemed suspicious. Every glance in my direction felt loaded with meaning. I hated feeling so paranoid, but I could not help it. In the afternoon, my phone buzzed again. I froze, my heart pounding as I picked it up. This time the message was longer. You think you are safe, but you are not. I know where you are. My stomach churned as I read the words. Whoever this was, they were not just watching, they wanted me to feel scared. And it was working. It was working. I decided I could not handle this alone anymore. I called a friend and explained what had been happening. They were immediately concerned and insisted I report it to the authorities. I hesitated, but their reassurance gave me the push I needed. I gathered all the evidence I had and headed to the local police station, my nerves on edge the entire time. The officer I spoke to took my report seriously, which was a relief. They explained that while it was difficult to trace anonymous messages, they would do their best to investigate. They also gave me advice on how to protect myself, like being cautious about what I shared online and keeping my phone and email secure. It felt good to have someone else involved, even if the situation was still unresolved. That evening, I took extra precautions around my home. I double-checked the locks, set up a few security cameras, and kept my phone close. The messages had stopped, at least for now, but I could not let my guard down. I kept replaying the events in my head, trying to figure out who could be behind this and why. No obvious suspects came to mind, which made it all the more unnerving. As the days passed, the fear began to fade, though it never fully disappeared. The police had not found anything yet, and there had been no new messages. Life started to feel normal again, though I was more cautious than before. The experience had shaken me, but it also taught me to be more vigilant. I knew I could not control everything, but I could at least take steps to protect myself. Weeks later, I received a call from the police. They had traced the messages back to a phone that had been stolen a month earlier. It seemed like a random act of intimidation, likely done by someone with no real connection to me. The officer reassured me that the person was unlikely to contact me again. Hearing this brought a sense of closure, though I remained cautious. Looking back, the experience was terrifying, but it also made me stronger. I learned the importance of trusting my instincts and seeking help when needed. While I would never know for sure who had sent those messages or why, I chose not to dwell on it. Life was too precious to live in fear, and I was determined to move forward, wiser and more prepared than before. Story 13. I stepped out of my house and froze at the sight before me. My trash can lay on its side, its lid several feet away, and the contents were spilled across the driveway. Among the mess, I noticed envelopes and papers, my mail from the past week, scattered as though someone had rummaged through it. My heart sank as I crouched down, picking up the pieces one by one. I tried to make sense of why this had happened, and who could have done it. I glanced up and down the street, hoping for some clue, but everything was quiet. The neighbors' yards looked untouched, their trash bins upright and undisturbed. My stomach twisted with unease. The idea that someone had specifically targeted me sent a wave of discomfort through me. I tried to convince myself it might have been an animal, but the way the mail was strewn seemed too deliberate. As I gathered the envelopes, I noticed some of them had been torn open. Bills, bank statements, and other personal correspondence lay exposed, their contents partially missing. My fingers trembled as I stuffed them back into a pile. It felt like an invasion, someone prying into my life in a way that left me feeling vulnerable. I could not tell if anything important was taken, but the thought alone was enough to unsettle me. Once everything was cleaned up, I took the mail inside and spread it out on the table. I carefully examined each piece, checking for anything unusual. A few envelopes were missing entirely, but I could not recall exactly what they might have contained. My mind raced with possibilities. Could this be random, or was someone intentionally targeting me? I locked my door and sat down, trying to calm my thoughts. I decided to report the incident to the local police, though I was not sure what they could do. An officer arrived later that day and listened as I explained what had happened. They asked a few questions and made notes, but it was clear there was little they could act on. They suggested installing a security camera and keeping an eye out for anything suspicious. Their advice was helpful but did little to ease my growing paranoia. That night I struggled to fall asleep. Every sound outside made me jump, every shadow seemed suspicious. I kept thinking about the missing mail and what someone might do with it. Personal information, addresses, and account numbers were all potential targets. The idea of someone using that information against me made my chest tighten with anxiety. I double-checked the locks on my doors and windows before finally collapsing into bed. Over the next few days, I tried to go about my routine, but I could not shake the unease. I ordered a security camera online and set it up near the driveway as soon as it arrived. The camera gave me a small sense of control, but I still found myself glancing out the window more often than usual. I began to notice small things that seemed out of place. A car parked on the street for longer than usual, a figure lingering at the corner, and even footsteps in the snow near my property. One morning I discovered another unsettling detail. The utility bill I was expecting never arrived, even though the due date was approaching. I checked with the service provider, and they confirmed it had been sent days ago. My heart sank further. Whoever had taken my mail was actively disrupting my life, and I had no idea who or why. I updated the police, but they had no new leads. The breaking point came a week later when I received an unfamiliar envelope in my mailbox. It was unmarked except for my name and address, written in uneven block letters. My hands trembled as I opened it, pulling out a single sheet of paper. Written in bold, black ink was a chilling message. It read, "You should be more careful." My knees nearly gave out as I clutched the note, my pulse racing. Someone was watching me, and they wanted me to know it. I immediately called the police, my voice shaky as I described the latest development. This time, they took the situation more seriously. They promised to increase patrols in the area and send officers to collect the note for evidence. The thought of someone targeting me so deliberately filled me with dread. I wondered if I had unknowingly done something to provoke this, or if it was just the work of a random person seeking to intimidate me. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and vigilance. I hardly left the house unless absolutely necessary, and when I did, I constantly checked my surroundings. The security camera became my lifeline, and I reviewed its footage obsessively. For a while, there was nothing unusual, just the normal comings and goings of neighbors and delivery drivers. Then, one night, the camera captured something that made my blood run cold. Around midnight, a figure appeared on the edge of the driveway. The person was wearing dark clothing and a hood, making it impossible to see their face. They walked slowly, stopping near the trash can before crouching down and rifling through it. I watched in horror as they pulled out an envelope, inspected it, and then walked off into the night. The footage was clear enough to show their movements, but not their identity. I handed the footage over to the police, hoping it would lead to some answers. They assured me they were working on the case, but I could sense their frustration at the lack of concrete evidence. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in my life became unbearable. I started making plans to move, feeling like it was the only way to escape this nightmare. Just as I was finalizing the details of my relocation, the police called with an update. They had identified the individual from the camera footage and had taken them into custody. It turned out to be someone with a history of harassment, targeting random individuals to instill fear. They had no personal connection to me, which was both a relief and a source of lingering unease. The police assured me the person would face charges, and I could finally put this behind me. With the ordeal over, I began to feel a sense of normalcy returning to my life. The security camera stayed, a permanent reminder of how vulnerable I had felt. I made a point to be more cautious with my personal information and took extra steps to secure my mail. Although the experience left a scar, I refused to let it define me. I moved forward, determined to reclaim my sense of peace and safety. Story 14. The moment I stepped into the house, I felt it. It was not something I could explain easily, but there was an unease in the air. The usual comfort of my home seemed absent, replaced by a subtle tension that prickled at the back of my neck. I set my bag down near the door and instinctively checked the locks. They were secure, just as I had left them that morning. Still, I could not shake the feeling that something was not right. As I made my way down the hallway, my eyes scanned the familiar surroundings. Nothing seemed out of place. The furniture sat exactly as it should, and there were no signs of forced entry. Yet my heart continued to beat a little faster, as though my body sensed something my mind could not see. I told myself I was overthinking. Perhaps it was just the exhaustion of a long day creeping up on me. When I reached the bathroom, I froze. The small window above the sink was wide open, letting in a cool evening breeze. I stared at it for several seconds, trying to process what I was seeing. I distinctly remembered closing it that morning. I always made a habit of securing the windows before leaving, especially since I lived alone. My thoughts scrambled for a reasonable explanation. Perhaps I had forgotten this one, though that was unlike me. I approached the window cautiously, peering out into the dimly lit backyard. The grass swayed gently in the wind, and the faint sound of distant traffic reached my ears. Nothing seemed to miss out there, but the fact remained that the window had been opened. I slid it shut and locked it firmly, making sure it could not be pushed open again. My reflection in the mirror caught my eye. I looked pale, my unease clearly showing on my face. Leaving the bathroom, I decided to check the rest of the house. Room by room, I went through every corner, opening closets and looking behind furniture. Nothing appeared disturbed. Still, I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched. My mind raced with possibilities. Could someone have been inside while I was gone? If so, where were they now?